So you're probably wondering what somebody who spent 30 years doing an ancient craft is going to talk about innovation. So I'll tell you my story, and you can decide. When I was 7 years old, my father came home from his job at Stern Brothers one night, and he was carrying a box. He gathered our family around, and out of the box, he took what had to be the most beautiful art object I'd ever seen. It was an intricately decorated egg. Our family oohed and ahed over this thing of such extraordinary beauty. And then my father put it in a very special place. He put it on the bureau in his bedroom, where the only other objects were a portrait of my mother and one of my grandparents. I used to sneak into their bedroom and stand on tiptoe just so I could look at this thing of such amazing beauty. That was a good 20 years before I ever heard them referred to as Ukrainian Easter eggs. But that was the first step on the journey that brings me here today. My family is not, my family is not Ukrainian. Let me go back. There. In fact, we never even celebrated Easter. I'm Jewish. There's a little Jewish theme going on here. We're Jewish. So you're probably wondering, what is this nice Jewish girl doing, decorating eggs? I learned the craft as a high school art teacher back in the early 70s. Now you have to understand, I was an arrogant 24-year-old, and I had never heard the words Ukrainian Easter eggs. But one of the other teachers said that one of the things we would do with our students was Ukrainian Easter eggs. And I thought, you do Easter eggs in high school? And then she opened up a dozen of hers, and I said, oh, how do you do that? She taught me that afternoon. I went home that night, and I made my first one. And I have to tell you, I was hooked. Pretty soon, this passion turned into an obsession. And I was invited to give a demonstration at a department store in Lower Manhattan called John Wanamaker's. Now, the women in the audience will totally understand this, that in order to get ready for the demonstration, I needed the perfect Ukrainian embroidered blouse. So I went to my favorite shop in the East Village where I bought all of my supplies, Surma. And I was looking through the selection of blouses there, and the owner of the store, Mr. Surma, came over, and I told him about my mission, and he got this big smile on his face. He said, I used to do demonstrations in department stores. In fact, I once demonstrated in a department store window right on 42nd Street. And I looked at him and I said, it wasn't by any chance Stern Brothers, was it? And he said, yes. I said, I wonder if you knew my father, Larry Goodman. He was in charge of special events. And he said, of course I knew Larry. He was the one who hired me. In fact, I once gave him one of my eggs. So I started with the traditional designs. The colors, the lines, every line, every color, every symbol has a meaning that the person who makes it intends for the person who's going to receive it. They're called Pysanky Eggs, which have been written on. But pretty soon, the artist in me wanted to innovate. And I started, it was the early 70s, and the bicentennial was about to happen. So there was a lot of interest in American patchwork quilts. So I started including some stitching on the eggs themselves, or the heart patterns and checkerboards. And then I went entirely to my own designs, incorporating the patchwork quilts. Anything that had an interesting pattern on it, if you were wearing a tie or a scarf, I would ask to borrow it. And so I would use paisley designs or anything that was of interest. It was also the early 70s, and everybody was driving these. So I decided to put those on the eggs. So my creativity was fueling the innovation in my work. I got an ostrich egg to work on, and I decided to cut the egg itself, scallop it, apply the double wedding ring design to it, and make a bowl from it. So you can see that creativity was what was fueling my passion at the time. I exhibited my work at craft shows all over New England. And my sister came with me to a show one weekend, and she made a very interesting observation. My eggs started at the Pink Tent Festival here in Stamford in the early 70s at $8 each. And they quickly went to $25, $50, $75, and so on, until I had pretty much saturated the Ukrainian Easter egg market in the Northeast. So she made this really interesting observation. People would gather around my booth, they would ooh and ah over my work, and then they would leave. And she said, you know, Jane, I think if people could wear your eggs, they would buy them. And I'm picturing like, I don't know, how is that going to happen? But I knew that she was onto something. And so my next innovation was fueled by the marketplace. And I figured out a way to cut the shells and to make jewelry pieces from them. And I actually have on a pair of earrings that I made. So they were cut from the shells, reinforced with epoxy, and I made pins, brooch, earrings, cufflinks, barrettes, and so on. And here are a bunch of the brooches that I had made. Like every other craft artist in the 80s and early 90s, we were sending out postcards. This was pre-computer, pre-email, pre-social media. And I wanted to reach a larger market. I wanted to get more national. And my assistant came in one day, and she brought in this catalog. And I thought, why is she showing me this catalog? It was a call to artists. Flax Art Design had wonderful creative gifts inside, and they wanted imaginative covers. So they said, if you could design artwork with the Flax logo, the letter F, which you can see on the cow, it's like, oh, now it makes sense, you could win a prize. So we figured, we worked for weeks and weeks trying to figure out, how am I going to get this F onto my eggs? In what way? And one after another disaster. But finally, the deadline was looming, and I came up with an egg, one F on the egg. And if you look very carefully, you can see it. So we submitted this design. There should be an arrow going to it. There it goes. Everybody got it? 3 months later, the phone rang, and it was Craig Flax asking for me. He said, are you sitting down? And I said, yes. He said, you've won first prize, which meant that not only did I win a $1,000 gift certificate to the merchandise in the catalog, but also my eggs went out on the cover to 1.2 million people around the country. As a result of this, I got a call from the director of retail operations at the Guggenheim Museum saying he had to have my work. And who was I to refuse him? I got another call, which I'll save till the end. Sometimes the world isn't ready for our innovations, and I want to tell you a story of one that happened that just didn't quite make it. When I was, the first time I walked by the Paper House collection at the store, these were the first photograph die-cut cards. This had never been done before. And from the moment I saw these, I knew that I wanted my egg images on the cards. And in 1988, I wrote a letter to Paper House Productions telling them my idea. About, whoops, that was a little preview there. Okay. About a week later, I got a letter from the art director there saying, great idea. Like, okay. I was like, where's the money? I send you an idea, but no. So I thought, okay, I went to Photomat, and this was before digital cameras, before enlarged, none of that stuff existed on the computer. So I took some slides, and I had them enlarged at Photomat. I cut them out. I used press type to write Happy Easter and sent them back to the art director. This is what I want it to look like. And again, this is terrific. And then I went to the Jacob Javits Convention Center where the stationery show was going on, and I walked by Paper House, and I introduced myself, and they said, yes, we love your work. We want to do it. And a couple more years passed, and then finally, I got into a telephone negotiating session with the owner of Paper House Productions, and he asked me my terms. What royalty or commission did I want on their using my designs? I had no idea. I didn't know what terms were. But I was cool, and I said, 10%. And he said, who do you think you are, the Wizard of Oz? Now, I know that silence is a good negotiating tool, but I think you're supposed to use it by choice. I was so dumbfounded by his comment that I was speechless, and I hung up the phone. It was months before I could actually go buy the Paper House collection at my local stationery store, but when I did, I saw that there was actually a Wizard of Oz collection. He wasn't being as rude as he was being literal. I renewed my campaign. 5 more rounds of correspondence, 4 more trips to the Jacob Javits Center yielded nothing. I knew I was going to have to do more than click my heels together 3 times. In 1996, my book, by the way, I was working on some other things. My book, Decorating Eggs, came out. And when it did, the first people I thought about were Paper House Productions, because now the eggs were exactly as I imagined them, full size, large. They would make beautiful cards. And I sent off a copy to Paper House with a very brief note that said, "Last chance." I call that my what the hell marketing. 3 days later, they called and ordered 2 of my designs, 9 years after that initial introduction. That year, my eggs appeared in their catalog right next to Fabergé. But they weren't the die-cut eggs. They did make one magnet of my work, but it wasn't how I imagined it. And I realized that innovation, the world isn't always ready for my innovation or yours. One other story I want to tell you about that was an innovation of mine was happened shortly after that. I'm a part of the National Speakers Association, and I used to go to chapter meetings in Massachusetts, in the Boston area. And I would go up on a Friday night, stay at a hotel, and then get a jump on it because it was Saturday from 9 to 3. So I'm staying in this hotel, and there's one of those communal breakfasts. And all I wanted to do was read my book and get ready to drive up the road. But it was very crowded, and a woman came up to me, and she said, "Do you mind if I sit here?" And I did mind, but I didn't let her know. But so I even deigned to speak to her. I said, "So what brings you to Massachusetts?" And she said, "It's my granddaughter's middle school graduation." It was June. And I was hoping for something more interesting. But then she said, "What about you?" And I said, "I'm a professional speaker." And she said, "What do you speak about?" I said, "I'm an artist. I talk about turning your passion into a successful business." She was becoming so much more interesting the more I spoke. And then she said, "I'm an artist too." And I thought, everybody thinks they're an artist. I'm so judgmental, I'm giving her no credit. And so I start qualifying her. I said, "Do you sell your work?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Where?" And she says, "New York." And I'm thinking, Buffalo. And she says, "New York, Manhattan, 57th Street. I'm thinking, oh no, I don't know any contemporary artists. Like the scales have tipped. I'm in over my head. I'm so embarrassed, but I keep talking. And I say, "Tell me about your work." She said, "I paint large autobiographical triptychs," which are those 3-panel paintings. She said, "And then I stitch on them." And I said, "Oh my God, what's your name?" And she said, "Faith Ringgold." Anybody know Faith Ringgold? Well, I knew who Faith Ringgold was because she was in every quilt magazine, and I was doing quilts on my eggs. And I said, "Oh my God, you're Faith Ringgold? Can you wait here a minute?" I ran out to my car. I bring in my book decorating eggs. I bring in a dozen of my eggs in a Stu Leonard's egg carton. And Faith Ringgold looks at every page of my book. And then we open up the eggs, and she said, "How much are they a dozen?" Now, no one had ever asked me that question, and at the time, they were $250 each. So I quickly calculated, and I said, $3,000. She said, "I would only sell them by the dozen, and I would sell them in a glass egg carton." Oh. I thought, that's $1 million idea. I went on to my speakers meeting. I couldn't wait to get home till Monday, till I could call my coach and say, "Oh my God, I got $1 million idea. What do I do?" It's like, I was so excited. And my coach said, "Jane, could you take a month just to research what materials you would use, where they would sell, who your market would be?" And my thought was, and I think every other innovator must think this too, that every other Ukrainian Easter egg decorator in the world had the same idea and was going to bring them to market before I did. That was my fear. But I took my time, and 18 months later, I figured out what materials I wanted to use, who would manufacture them, where they would sell. And 18 months later, these debuted at the Jacob Javits gift show, a collection called the Circle of Life Collection. They were actually Limoges boxes that opened up, bearing 6 of my designs. So I'm not doing the eggs anymore. The egg was actually the nucleus of every innovation I created, from my own creativity to what the market demanded, to marketing to a larger audience, and then actually the eggs themselves demanding to be seen in a completely different way. Now what I do is I coach other creative women who want to turn their passions into successful businesses. And that last phone call that I got, the second phone call that I got when my eggs came out on the Flax catalog, was from, I think, the greatest innovator of our time. He had seen them on the cover, and Steve Jobs called and ordered 2 of my eggs. Thank you.